I'm reviewing is Ice Age 3 Dawn of the Dinosaurs. So yes, we're continuing on the Ice Age series of movie reviews. And in all honesty, this was the last good movie in the series because, yeah, Continental Drift and Collision Course are not good movies at all, but I will be covering those very soon here. But anyways, what is the plot of this movie? Well, the plot of this movie is as follows. Manny and Ellie expect a baby while Diego considers leaving. Sid finds 3 dinosaur eggs and adopts them. A fierce mother T-Rex takes Sid underground, prompting the herd to rescue him with the help of a one-eyed weasel named Buck. So that's the basic premise of this movie. Now, how was the movie received? Well, as you guys know, when the very first Ice Age movie was released in the theaters in 2002, it was a very well received, critically acclaimed movie by both critics and audiences. And the first Ice Age to this day is considered to be one of the best animated movies of the 2000s. And like I said, the first movie was a very well received movie by both critics and audiences. However, the second movie got mixed reactions by critics and was considered to be a step down from the first movie, although I personally liked the second one. And this third movie was very much like the second movie, considered to be a step down from the first movie, but I personally always liked this movie. And this movie, when it was released on July 9th of 2009, which was about 9 days before my 6th birthday, because I was born in 2003, but so this movie came out 9 days before I turned 6, which is pretty cool. I didn't see this movie in the theaters, but oh well, it is what it is. But anyways, this was the highest grossing movie in the franchise, making $886.7 million worldwide on a $90 million budget. And like I said, was easily, the highest grossing movie in the franchise. And rightfully so deserved, in my opinion, because like I said, this is my personal favorite Ice Age movie. But without further ado, let's get into it. So the movie starts off where we follow our saber-toothed squirrel, Scrat, who's basically looking for the acorn. And I like the little section at the beginning where he's like sniffing the ground and stuff like that. And then it cuts to our logo, Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs. And then Scrat we are introduced to this female squirrel named Scrat-Tay, and Scrat-Tay is very much the female version of Scrat. She doesn't really talk and stuff like that, but this is during a scene where Scrat is trying to find his acorn, and then he keeps his eye on this lady squirrel who he finds absolutely attractive. And I like the part where he falls over, with a smile on his face, because he's in love. But then she sees that this female squirrel, Scrat-Tay, has his acorn, which enrages him. And then he scratches part of the side of a tree trunk and then hides behind there. And then throughout the course of the movie, it's Scrat and Scrat-Tay fighting over the acorn, which I thought was hilarious. But then, not long after that, there's a part where Manny is worried that the baby is coming and stuff like that. Because, like I said, Manny and Ellie expect a baby because, well, Ellie's pregnant. And one thing I liked about Scrat-Tay is how it's one of those squirrels that can open up its arms, but, like, basically have these gliding wings. Basically, it's a gliding squirrel that can glide in the air by opening the side of its fur, kind of like wings, which I thought was a nice, little touch. And again, the whole part where Scrat's falling and Scrat-Tay is like using the, to her advantage, she's using the, her fur to like, glide, but like steal the acorn from Scrat at the beginning. That was hilarious. And then there's the whole part where Scrat is in the ground and then Diego, Manny, Sid, and, and the two possums, Crash and Eddie are running, and then Scrat accidentally gets stuck on Sid's foot, and he's trying to get it off, and then Sid basically, Manny has, like, this giant, basically a giant empty turtle shell with water, and he's like, guys, the baby is coming, and stuff like that, and then Sid accidentally knocks him down the hill, and then Manny finds out that it was a false alarm, that Ellie, that the baby's not coming. And then one of the guys says, that's the third false alarm this week and stuff like that. And then early on in the movie, what I really like about this is how Diego, he is considering leaving, he is strongly considering leaving Manny and Ellie, because while he likes them as, as animals, he feels like it's not his fit lifestyle, and his lifestyle is hunting. And I like the whole scene where Diego is trying to chase the deer and it it doesn't work out. And then we get a scene where Manny is basically building, he basically built a little playground for their kid, when Ellie gives birth, which I thought was, the design of it was cute and, very thoughtful. And then I like the part when Sid is like, at least I have my looks. And this is early on in the movie. This is like about the 11-minute mark. I like the part where Sid's looking at his reflection in ice and said, at least I still have my looks. And then he smiles, but then the ice cracks as if it's a mirror reflection, and then he falls through the ground. And then he finds these 3 dinosaur eggs, and he decides to name of the eggs Herbert, Shelly, and Yoko, which I thought was cool. And then, of course, there's the whole scene where one of the eggs accidentally rolls down a hill, and then Sid tells the other eggs to stay put, and he basically uses a large piece of tree bark to basically try to ski down and get one of the eggs, which is successful at first until the other ones roll down, and then he has to chase he has to chase after that, and it's going fine until it isn't, and Sid manages to successfully capture 2 of them, but we think that one of the eggs is going to splatter on the ground until Ellie catches it with her trunk. But then Manny, voiced by Ray Romano, basically tells Sid, these eggs are not yours. You need to take them back. And Manny is very smart for saying this. And then it's nighttime and it's raining, so Sid decides to bring the eggs under like a, basically under like the ledge of a cave, to stop it from being rained on, because Sid, was able to, using like a chalked rock, make a little drawing of like little faces on the eggs. And then I like the part where Sid is trying to wipe dry the eggs off when it goes horribly wrong and it causes smudges, really messing up the fake faces he drew on there, which I thought was funny. And I'm gonna say this, of the Ice Age movies, I think this is the funniest. Now granted, this is probably not the best Ice Age movie in terms of like dramatic stuff, but and from like a dramatic standpoint, but I do think it is the funniest movie in the series, which is why it's my personal favorite Ice Age movie. And I do think that about 95, I think that about a good chunk of the comedy, about 98% of the comedy works really well in this movie. And I like the part about 17 minutes and 32 seconds into the movie where we don't see an animal, but like we see something through a large animal's point of view walking through the forest. And then we see that like part of the hole that, where the eggs were is destroyed. And basically us getting the implication that, yeah, something big is coming because, the eggs were taken. And I like the part slightly over 18 minutes into the movie where Sid wakes up and he sees that there are these baby dinosaurs. And the baby dinosaurs, like these baby T-Rexes, they all think that Sid is their mom. And I do like the whole montage sequence where Sid is trying to raise the dinosaurs. And I like the part where one of the baby dinosaurs is like basically staring into this water and there are these piranhas with ferocious teeth, but then this dinosaur shows it, even scaring off the piranhas. I thought that was funny. And I like the part when one of the dinosaurs accidentally bites Sid's feet and he says, no biting. And then they all cry. And then Sid says, oh, I'm going to feed you. And then there's the whole scene where Sid tries to milk an elk. Not necessarily an elk, but like a bull of type. Again, I'm not familiar with what type it is, but he tries to. And then there's the whole part where this animal chases him and Sid's like, I thought you were a female. And then the baby dinosaurs chase after, which I thought was a good adult joke. But that's what I mean. This is the funniest movie in the series because it's very entertaining for kids, but it also has some good adult jokes that would definitely go under a kid's head. Because I'll be honest, when I was a kid, I didn't understand the adult jokes, but now that I'm an adult, I find these jokes absolutely hilarious. And then, of course, there's the whole scene about 20 minutes into the movie where Scrat and Scrat-Tay are fighting over the squirrel again, but then they get stuck in bubbles, and then, but like, we see the acorn is stuck in a bubble and Scrat-Tay wants to get it, but I like the whole scene where Scrat and Scrat-Tay are basically playing bumper cars, but in bubbles, trying to knock each other away to get to the acorn first. That was absolutely hilarious. And then, of course, there's the whole scene 21 minutes into the movie where Sid basically tells the baby dinosaurs, we cannot go into this park. Basically the playground that, Manny built for, the baby that Ellie's gonna have. And Sid basically tells the dinosaurs, hold up, we can't go in here, like, this is for kids. And then Sid's like, wait a minute, you are kids, because Sid is under the impression that he's a mom, even though he's not. But then the dinosaurs go on the playground, and then some other kids, which are not dinosaurs, say the playground's open, and a whole stampede of them charge. And then Sid's like, wait a minute, I didn't say for everyone. And take a guess, guys. Does letting all those kids on the playground with dinosaurs, does it end up being a good idea? Spoiler alert, no it doesn't. And it's just an absolute riot. Like, for example, there's the whole anteater mother who, her son is basically pushed down like an ice slide by like one of the baby T-Rexes, and then the baby T-Rex, basically eats one of them. And then I like the whole scene where Sid basically says to spit it out, otherwise we're leaving the park in 1, 2, and then Sid says, don't make me count to 3. And then the dinosaur spits out a baby bird, and then the anteater says, that's not my son. And then Sid's like, close enough, which I thought was funny. And then basically Manny is not happy when he sees that, this didn't go very well. And basically the dinosaur is able to barf up the anteater's son, which I thought, again, was funny. And Manny basically says, I told you to take them back and you kept them. They're not yours. You need to take them back. But then we get the whole scene about 24 minutes and 50 seconds into the movie where the mama T-Rex, which is basically the T-Rex that you see on the cover right here, basically stomps into the area looking for her children. And then Manny is looking at people and he's saying, nobody move a muscle. And then and then I like the part where I think it's like a porcupine of some type. I'm not sure what it is, but one of the kids basically runs away screaming, which, causes the T-Rex, to come and basically come into the village. And Sid is hiding under these rocks, basically hiding in a hideout with the baby T-Rexes, and the mom is looking for them. And Sid basically tells the baby T-Rexes to stop crying, be quiet. But of course, the mama T-Rex hears it, ripping the giant rock roof off of the hideout, freaking out Sid. And then with her mouth, the mama T-Rex drops it, and Sid said, these are my kids, and if you want them, you're gonna have to get through me, like an absolute moron. And then the T-Rex carries off Sid, and basically Diego just randomly shows up to the village, because the forest part of it where everyone else is, because he heard all this commotion and didn't really know what was going on. And then Diego says, Sid, because he sees this T-Rex carrying off Sid. And even a few minutes before the T-Rex carries off Sid, Ellie said, I thought those things were extinct and stuff like that. And yes, this technically, now, I know technically this doesn't fit in with paleontology because dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, and Ice Age is supposed to take place 20,000 years ago, but whatever. At the end of the day, it's just a movie, so it's meant to be family entertainment, so whatever. It didn't bother me at all. I honestly thought that this was the best direction. I think this is the best direction they could have taken a third movie in, because let's be honest, if this is the best direction they could have taken a third movie in, because I'm sorry, if it was just another Ice Age movie where they have to survive the flood, it would have been boring and very repetitive, like the fourth movie was, but I'll get to that when I get to that. So because of it, this basically, Diego is forced, Diego, Crash and Eddie, Manny and Ellie are basically forced to go look for Sid because Sid's important to them, as we know. But then Manny, Sid, and Ellie, no, Manny, Ellie, Diego, Crash and Eddie go underground to where Sid went, and I like the whole scene where the Ankylosaur with its club tail tries to attack Crash and Eddie, and they pretend to be dead, but then, Diego swaps through to save them, and the whole scene where Ellie is able to get a long-necked herbivore dinosaur to basically eat some leaves, so Ellie, Manny, Diego, Crash, and Eddie decide to slide down a dinosaur is a rather cool scene. And then, 32 minutes into the movie, we are introduced to the character Buck Wild, voiced by Simon Pegg, who is of all the characters in these movies, he's honestly, like, if I had to do a list of my top 5 favorite Ice Age characters, Buck Wild would easily be number 1. I mean, he's just the epitome of cool, and Simon Pegg did a great job voicing him, and I'm a fan of Simon Pegg as an actor, of course, in this movie. Simon Pegg, he was also great in Shaun of the Dead, which is one of my favorite comedies. He was also great in the movie Hot Fuzz and others. So it's nice to see, and those are definitely not kids' movies. They're great comedies, but they're definitely not kids' movies. So to see him go from making rated R comedies to voicing a character in a family movie like this was pretty interesting. And again, I thought that Buck Wild was absolutely hilarious in this movie, because he's basically a one-eyed weasel with a leaf as an eye patch. And there is a reason he's like that, which I'll get to in a little bit here. But I like the whole scene where basically I like the whole scene where Buck Wild basically says, he says, my arch nemesis Rudy, he gave me this eye patch, and then like an idiot, Crash and Eddie's like, he gave it to you for free? Hopefully he'll give it to me too, which I thought that scene was absolutely hilarious. But by far, the funniest scene with Scrat and Scrat-Tay in this movie is when Scrat is, trying to get his acorn, but he accidentally, he's stuck to a tree because the tree has tar on it. He stretches to the ground. He's about to grab his acorn, but then the tree just smashes on top of him, and then Scrat falls over. And then I like the part where Scrat-Tay is able to roll up the log, by running after Scrat gets the acorn covered in tar stuck to his chest, and then Scrat-Tay rips it off, and we can hear Scrat basically screaming at the top of his lungs as if he died, but it's really just in pain. That scene was absolutely hilarious. And then of course there's the whole scene where a carnivorous plant swallows Manny and Diego, but of course Buck Wild goes in to save the day and basically cuts the blue wire, which I like these subtle references because they're pretty much references to stuff we're familiar with as society, but it's very much its own spin to it. Like, for example, I really like the part where Buck Wild, where he's using a rock as a phone, pretending to be on the phone talking to someone. That scene was absolutely hilarious. And then the whole part where, like I said, he saves, I like the part where he jumps inside of the carnivorous plant because basically he has to stop the plant because if he doesn't, Manny and Diego will be digested in a few minutes. But I like the part where Buck Wild is inside and he basically has a dinosaur tooth for a knife, but it's attached to a handle with basically vines tied around it to hold it in place. And I like the part where he cuts the red wire, but it basically reminded me of a car battery where there's blue and red wire, or basically a bomb, which I thought that was funny. And then I like the part where he accidentally cuts the red wire, but then it doesn't go right, so then he cuts the blue one, and then of course Manny, Diego, and Buck Wild are fine. Again, great stuff. And then we get the part about 41 minutes into the movie where well, just slightly before 41 minutes, Buck Wild is able to pick up sense because a sense because basically Manny, Ellie, and all of them basically tell Buck Wild that they're basically trying to find Sid, and he's able, and because he's a weasel, he licks the ground. He basically says it smells like something, and then Diego says that's Sid, and they were carried off by the T-Rex. And then of course there's the whole part where the T-Rex basically tries to eat Sid because Sid kidnapped them, but of course it does not work, and the baby dinosaurs basically try to protect Sid because they think Sid is their mother. And and I thought that was a nice little dynamic there. But by far, one of the funniest scenes in this movie is where Crash, Eddie, Manny, and Diego basically go down. Basically, they go down something, not an escalator lift, but they go down something similar to it, where it's basically like these it's the rib cage of like this giant animal that's like attached to like this vine, basically acting as a ski lift. And so Manny, Diego, Crash, and Eddie go on it, and basically Buck Wild basically tells them, not to go, do not breathe in the fumes because it's nerve gas that'll make you laugh to death. But basically Ellie and Buck Wild get down safely. And then we get one of the funniest scenes where basically Sid, Diego, and Manny Manny, Diego, and the two possums accidentally breathe some of it in, and then they have this really high-pitched voice, and then Buck Wild he's just not putting up with any of it. And then I like the part where he climbs over there. He says, "Do you realize if you keep laughing, we're all gonna die?" But then his voice gets high-pitched. But basically, Buck Wild told Ellie that the skeletons from down below died from laughing. So basically, after all of them are laughing, minus the exception of Ellie, she decides to pull the escalator down. Well, escalator, and they get down to safety and stuff like that, and again, I do think the comedy does work well, for the most part, except for the whole joke that, Crash and Eddie wet their own bed. Like, that joke I didn't care for. You could have cut that out. But otherwise, for the most part, the comedy, minus the exception of that, does work rather well in the movie. And then, of course, there's the whole scene where Sid is basically trying to feed vegetables to the baby T-Rexes, but they don't like it. So then the mother gives them a bird, and, Sid throws it off the cliff because the bird's alive. And then the T-Rex is getting fed up with it, so the mama T-Rex basically gives them, like, a giant piece of meat, and the baby T-Rexes eat it. And then basically the mama T-Rex hears this loud dinosaur roar, so they basically have to get away. And we learned that this large dinosaur's name is Rudy, which I like Rudy in this movie because Rudy is kind of similar to Spinosaurus, but it's not a Spinosaurus. And at just slightly over 50 minutes into the movie, we basically see a giant dinosaur footprint that's gray stomp, basically as like a build-up, acting as if this dinosaur is bigger than the T-Rex. And then, of course, the whole scene where Buck Wild is playing with he's basically playing with these dinosaur skeletons on a stick as a puppet, even making fun of himself is absolutely funny. And then, about 51 minutes into the movie, we finally get the backstory as to why Buck Wild lost his eye. And we basically learned that this dinosaur called Rudy, which basically had a red eye, basically attacked him, and Buck Wild got to the top of a tree, but the dinosaur ate him. But before the dinosaur was able to swallow him, basically the dinosaur basically scratched at one of Buck Wild's eye, making him lose one of his eyes. But then Buck Wild is able to grab on the uvula of the dinosaur and swing out its mouth, shooting right out, popping one of the dinosaur's tooth out, and then which is what he has as the knife, which again is a rather cool backstory. And then, of course, there's the whole scene where Sid is being chased by Rudy, and he basically gets on top of lava crust. He gets on top of crust that's floating on lava, and Sid realizes it's hot, although he's about to fall off a cliff until Buck Wild, Crash, and Eddie are able to save him by getting on top of a pteranodon and, basically saving him. And then I like the whole part where Sid, and one thing I like about this movie, I like how with this movie at first, the mama dinosaur does not like Sid at first, but it does grow to like him, throughout the course of the movie. It does grow to respect and appreciate him. And I like the whole part, where at nighttime, the mama T-Rex decides to let Sid and her baby dinosaurs sleep inside of a cave, but like in a spot where Rudy won't see them. And we see Rudy in that one scene. And yeah, Rudy does not look like a dinosaur you want to upset at all. And then, of course, there's the whole scene where Ellie says Peaches, which basically is basically a code, because basically Manny and Ellie were discussing earlier on in the movie how they basically need a code, basically meaning if Ellie feels like she's about to give childbirth, they could say something quick that would that way they knew that that's what it meant. And basically, I like the whole part where Diego and Manny have to fight off these carnivorous dinosaurs that are trying to attack Ellie. And then, there's the whole scene where Sid arrives, and we see that, that Ellie gave birth to a beautiful baby mammoth. And this mammoth, Ellie and Manny decide to name Peaches, which I think is a cute name for a baby mammoth and stuff like that. And basically, we get the whole finale where closer to the end of the movie, we think our characters are going to go back, but then at the hour and 16-minute mark, there's the whole epic final battle where basically all our characters have to fight off this carnivorous dinosaur. And basically they trap it, and it works at first until Sid accidentally trips on the vine, basically holding the dinosaur down. The dinosaur gets up, and then I like the part where closer to the end of the movie, the mama T-Rex basically runs and charges at this thing, knocking Rudy off the cliff. And I like the part where Sid and the baby dinosaurs, are basically, and I like where Sid's talking to them and saying, I'm sure you're going to grow up to be big, scary dinosaurs just like your mama. And the dinosaur smiles at Sid, and, basically the kids and the mama dinosaur go off on their own. And then closer to the end of the movie, Buck Wild decides he's going to go with our main group of characters. But however, just before he's about to leave, he hears the sound of Rudy roaring, and he's like, Rudy, because basically Buck Wild was like, well, if Rudy's gone, then it's boring for me down here. But he decides to stay behind, and Diego accepts it. And then, of course, Buck Wild goes skiing down the basically a bridge of dinosaur bones attached to like a vine, and then, going back to his world, and then, back to the underworld, if you will. And then the movie ends where Sid, Manny, Diego, Crash, and Eddie, and Ellie are playing with the baby. They're all happy. And then we get to the real ending of the movie where Scrat and Scrat-Tay are fighting for the acorn at the end. I like where Scrat gets the acorn, and then Scrat-Tay is not happy at all, and then basically they're fighting over it, and the acorn smashes into the ground, and basically what happens is that they decide, basically lava shoots them up, but they're stuck to like part of a giant rock. And I like the part where Scrat knocks the acorn off, basically knocks Scrat-Tay off, and he gets the acorn all happy, and Scrat basically shoots up to the surface and is now on top of the ice ground above, and he's basically laughing in her face, holding the acorn in his hand, but then the ice sheet falls on top, knocking the acorn back down, and he has a screaming fit at the end, which is funny. But yeah, at the end of the day, this is a rather good movie. It's my favorite of the franchise, and to me, where they should have ended this franchise, because Ice Age, Continental Drift, and Collision Course were garbage, and I have not seen The Adventures of Buck Wild, that straight-to-streaming Disney Plus movie yet, but I have heard nothing but horrendous things about that movie, but I'll get to that once I review the other two, but I highly doubt I'm going to like that. But yeah, anyways, this is a really good movie, and if any of you guys are wanting to get into Ice Age, I would only recommend the first 3 movies. I would not recommend anything after the 3rd movie, but yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give Ice Age 3 Dawn of the Dinosaurs a 9 out of 10. So yeah, anyways, guys, thanks for watching my review, and we'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye now.